Close your eyes. Well, unless you're driving, of course.
Yeah, please keep your eyes open if you're on the road.
Right, safety first. But if you can, I want you to put yourself in a very specific place and time. We're going to the present moment of our source material today.
Which is such a vivid starting point.
It really is. It's April 1st, 2026. It is 6:35 p.m. Eastern Time. And you are standing at the Kennedy Space Center, specifically Pad 39A in Florida.
And being there at that specific distance from a launch pad, it's something human biology just hasn't evolved to process.
No, not
Because you aren't just looking at a machine,
You're looking at a 98-meter-tall rocket. I mean, that is a 30-story skyscraper packed with incredibly volatile propellants.
It's just an unfathomable amount of energy sitting there.
Exactly. And when that countdown hits zero, it ignites. We are talking about 8.8 million pounds of thrust just tearing into the concrete.
And the shockwaves, they don't just travel through the air.
Right, they travel through the ground itself.
They vibrate up through your shoes, straight into your chest cavity. It literally rattles your teeth in your skull.
It's wild to even imagine. And the acoustic energy is so massive that NASA actually has to dump hundreds of thousands of gallons of water onto the launch pad right at ignition.
Which is purely just to absorb the sound waves.
Wait, really? Just the sound?
Yeah.
Oh.
If they didn't do that, the sheer volume of the roar would bounce right off the concrete and tear the rocket apart. The sound completely envelops your physical body.
That's just mind-blowing. So as it clears the tower, it ascends smoothly, right? It carves this brilliant, blinding pillar of fire into the early evening sky.
No hiccups, a flawless ascent.
Flawless. And inside mission control, the atmosphere is chaotic, but, beautiful. It's the symphony of cheers. People are weeping openly, thunderous applause.
Because a visceral reaction in that room, it isn't just relief that the rocket didn't explode.
Right. It's the crushing weight of the historical stakes. This is the Artemis II mission.
Strapped inside that Orion spacecraft, sitting at the very tip of that controlled explosion, are 4 astronauts.
4 people.
Yeah. And they are doing something that humanity has essentially abandoned for over half a century.
It has been 52 years. Since Apollo 17 in 1972, humanity has essentially been lingering in our own cosmic driveway.
That's a great way to put it.
Like all the crewed spaceflight missions from the US, Russia, China, they've all just been circling in low Earth orbit.
And I think we really have to unpack what low Earth orbit actually means in terms of distance.
Oh, definitely.
Because the human brain is notoriously bad at scaling distances in space. You look up at the International Space Station and it feels like it's out in the deep black of the cosmos.
Right. It feels infinitely far away. But the ISS is roughly 400 kilometers away from the surface of the Earth.
Which isn't that far.
Not at all. To put that in perspective, if you got in your car and drove straight up at highway speeds, you'd be there before lunch.
Exactly. And that 400-kilometer bubble is where almost every single astronaut in human history has spent their entire career.
Minus the 24 Apollo astronauts, obviously.
Right. But Artemis II completely shatters that bubble. The moon is roughly 380,000 kilometers away.
Which is, nearly 1,000 times further away than the space station?
Just about, yeah. It's an entirely different paradigm. You're dealing with different orbital mechanics, extreme radiation exposure, and just the sheer psychological isolation of it.
I read this part in the source material, and it completely rewired my mental model of this mission. When you are out near the moon, that massive blue sphere we call home becomes so incredibly tiny that you can extend one single arm, hold up your hand, and completely eclipse the entire planet.
Every human who ever lived.
Every ocean, every mountain, all of it hidden behind your thumb. I actually had to stop and just stare at the wall for a minute when I read that.
It's a staggering reality. And it leads to a pretty wild statistic. About 80% of the people alive on Earth right now have never, in their entire lifetimes, witnessed human beings leaving the immediate vicinity of Earth.
80%?
Yeah. We are essentially looking at a generational amnesia. The vast majority of the global population only knows deep space exploration as, grainy historical footage.
But Artemis II is the moment that footage becomes a live broadcast again.
Absolutely.
But, the mission of our deep dive today isn't actually about the rocket hardware. We aren't going to spend the next hour breaking down thrust metrics or the aerodynamics of the capsule.
Which is fascinating stuff, but we have a different focus.
Right. We are going to do a dedicated forensic exploration of one specific passenger on that ship. Because among those 4 astronauts, 3 are American, but one of them is making history just by being in the seat.
Jeremy Hansen.
Exactly. He's a 50-year-old Royal Canadian Air Force colonel.
And he is the first non-American in the entire history of the human race to be assigned to a lunar mission.
Which is just incredible. And he didn't grow up in some elite aerospace incubator down in Houston or Florida.
No, not at all.
He grew up on a small farm in a tiny town called Ailsa Craig, up in Ontario, Canada. So today, we are charting a 40-year personal journey from a kid in a Canadian wheat field to the dark side of the moon.
It's quite the leap.
It really is. And if the listener, if you've ever had a wildly ambitious dream, a goal so big that it felt almost embarrassing to say out loud because it sounded so completely divorced from your current reality, this deep dive is going to fundamentally change how you look at the architecture of ambition.
Because Hansen's story isn't just a linear biography of a, highly successful pilot.
Right.
It operates as a masterclass in the human ecosystem required to sustain an impossible dream over decades of waiting, extreme testing, and immense psychological friction.
So let's go back to the beginning. Before Hansen was sitting on top of millions of pounds of rocket fuel, he was sitting in a wooden treehouse.
A slightly lower altitude.
Just slightly. But to understand the astronaut, we really need to understand the soil where the seed of this dream was planted.
And Ailsa Craig in the late 70s and 80s was very much rural agricultural Canada.
We are talking sweeping wheat fields, wide open skies, and winters where the snow easily piles up past your knees.
It's an environment dictated by immediate physical realities,
Yeah.
The weather, the harvest, the changing seasons.
It demands pragmatism.
Easily.
But then when he's about 7 or 8 years old, he has this massive spark moment. He opens up a family encyclopedia, volume 1, the letter A, and he turns the page to a black and white photograph of Neil Armstrong walking on the moon.
The collision of worlds there is profound. I mean, you have a young boy surrounded by knee-deep snow and heavy agricultural machinery, looking at a static image of a human being standing in the vacuum of an alien world.
And his brain didn't process it as ancient history.
No, he processed it as a living possibility.
He internalized it immediately. He actually went out to his backyard, climbed up into his wooden treehouse, and just simply decided, this is my spacecraft.
As kids do.
Right. But he started outfitting it with makeshift instruments, cardboard dials, random hardware he scavenged. He would invite his friends over and seriously, meticulously act out space missions. He was simulating the environment of a capsule.
And, childhood psychology tells us that imaginative play is crucial for developing neural pathways related to goal setting and problem solving.
Sure.
But usually the dinner bell rings, the game ends, and the child moves on to the next phase of development.
But for Jeremy, the game intensified into a structural ambition.
Yeah.
And this leads to what I think is one of the most defining moments of his life.
Well, for sure.
He gathered the courage to tell the adults in his life his ultimate, unshakable goal. He said, I'm going to be an astronaut, and I am going to fly to the moon.
In the 1980s, for a Canadian farm kid to say that is, frankly, statistically absurd.
Yeah, Canada didn't have an autonomous rocket launching program sending fleets to the moon.
Exactly.
But here's the reaction that altered history. When this farm kid declared he was going to the moon, nobody laughed.
Nobody.
His parents didn't chuckle and pat him on the head. They stopped, listened seriously, nodded, and offered support.
And it wasn't just his parents. His teachers didn't sit him down and tell him to look at local, realistic career options.
Even the neighbors and elders in the community offered sincere encouragement.
I really think we need to pause and analyze the sociology of that reaction, because it's very easy to dismiss that as just nice parenting.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I was actually going to push back on that exact point when I first read the sources.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, as a parent or a teacher, isn't it just a standard issue adult behavior to indulge a kid's fantasy? Like if a kid says they want to be a wizard, you say, great, let me know when your Hogwarts letter arrives. You just play along.
Right, but what's fascinating here is that indulging a fantasy is passive. What happened in Ailsa Craig was active preservation.
Okay, yeah. The analogy that clicked for me was planting a tropical fruit seed, like a mango, in the middle of a freezing Canadian winter.
Oh, that's a great image.
Right. It's a cute idea to stick it in the snow, but the only way that tropical seed actually survives the winter, let alone grows into a tree that bears fruit, is if the entire town agrees to come together, build a heated glass greenhouse around it, and maintain that internal temperature without fail for 20 years.
Yes.
That's not indulging a fantasy. That is an active collective refusal to let reality crush the seed.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The distinction between having a dream and the survival of a dream is immense.
Completely.
Having a massive ambition as a child is basically the default state of childhood. But the survival of that dream against the relentless, grinding friction of adult reality, the mortgage, the job market, the statistical improbabilities, that is incredibly rare.
And Hansen explicitly stated in interviews later in life that his dream only stayed alive because it was never forced into a practical box by adult doubt.
The power of a community deciding to take a child's ambition seriously.
If just one trusted authority figure, a beloved teacher or a stressed parent, had rolled their eyes and said, "Jeremy, be sensible," that might have been the crack that let the freezing winter air into the greenhouse.
Exactly. They provided the psychological safety required for the dream to transition from a treehouse game into a tangible, actionable goal.
But, a greenhouse only keeps the seed alive. At some point, you have to bridge the terrifying gap between playing in a wooden treehouse and actually sitting in the cockpit of a multi-million-dollar machine.
We'll have to do the work.
Right. The dream had to evolve into a brutally disciplined career path, and his father provided the catalyst for that transition by advising a 12-year-old Jeremy to join the Royal Canadian Air Cadets.
And the Air Cadets program is foundational in Canadian aviation. It teaches discipline and leadership, sure, but most importantly, it puts young teenagers in close proximity to actual flight mechanics.
And it's here that Jeremy experiences his second massive spark. He's 12 or 13, and he gets strapped into a glider for the very first time.
No engine.
No engine, just fiberglass, aerodynamics, and the sky.
The physics of a glider are incredibly unforgiving, but also incredibly pure.
How so?
Well, without propulsion, you are entirely dependent on understanding air currents, thermals, and the conversion of potential energy into kinetic energy. You have to literally feel the atmosphere reacting to the control surfaces of the aircraft.
Wow. So when he pulled back on that stick and felt the wings bite into the air, lifting him off the ground, he realized he absolutely needed to fly to survive.
It cemented it for him.
And once he had that physical confirmation, his acceleration was just staggering. By 17, he had earned his private pilot's license.
Which is wild. Balancing high school with the immense study and practical hours required to master navigation, meteorology, and emergency protocols well enough to be trusted alone in an aircraft is a tremendously rare feat for a teenager.
Definitely. So he graduates high school, joins the Canadian Armed Forces, and attends the Royal Military Colleges, where he starts building the intellectual scaffolding for spaceflight. He earns a space science degree in 1999 and then a master's degree in physics in 2000.
I want to highlight the necessity of those specific degrees, actually.
Yeah, please do.
Because being an astronaut is not just about being a good stick and rudder pilot. Space science and physics provide the mathematical language to understand orbital mechanics, thermodynamics, vector calculus.
Heavy math.
Heavy math. When you are docking a capsule in space, you aren't flying by feel. You are executing complex mathematical equations in three-dimensional space at 28,000 kilometers per hour.
Which is terrifying. But the academic rigor is just the prerequisite. The physical crucible is the next step. After his degrees, he becomes a fighter pilot for the Royal Canadian Air Force, flying the CF-18 Hornet.
A serious machine.
Yeah. Let's break down what flying a CF-18 actually demands of the human body and brain, because it is a violently dynamic environment.
The CF-18 is a twin-engine, multi-role fighter jet. Operating it is an exercise in extreme cognitive load management. Physically, you are pulling up to 9 Gs.
9 times your body weight.
Exactly.
Well,
That means your body temporarily weighs 9 times its normal weight. The blood is being forcibly drained from your brain into your legs.
oh, wow.
You have to perform an anti-G straining maneuver, tensing your lower body and doing specific breathing techniques just to maintain consciousness.
And while you are physically fighting just to stay conscious, you are simultaneously operating complex radar systems, managing weapons, communicating with ground and air assets, and flying at supersonic speeds.
If you panic, things go catastrophic in fractions of a second.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. When I was looking through the source material about his time as a fighter pilot, I realized my entire mental model of what a fighter pilot is had been corrupted by pop culture.
Oh, the Top Gun effect.
Exactly. When we think fighter pilot, we think of the maverick archetype. The arrogant, lone wolf daredevil whose ego enters the room 5 minutes before his body does.
Right.
But Jeremy Hansen shatters that stereotype completely.
He really does. The sources introduce a phenomenal anecdote from Major General Chris McKenna, who eventually commanded the Canadian Air Division.
Right.
He met a young Lieutenant Hansen at a swearing-in ceremony for new recruits.
McKenna walks into this church, and there is Hansen by the door. His uniform is utterly flawless. But it wasn't the uniform that struck McKenna.
What was it?
It was the fact that Hansen was dealing with a flood of completely lost, overwhelmed new recruits asking him a million questions. Where do I go? What form is this? And McKenna noted that Hansen was exceptionally, almost unusually kind.
Really?
Yeah, he answered every question with infinite patience. There wasn't a trace of the, I'm a hotshot fighter pilot, why am I dealing with rookies attitude. He was just warm.
In a hyper-competitive military environment, that kind of vulnerability and patience is incredibly rare.
And it wasn't a facade. The sources detail his time at flight school in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. And flight school is notoriously brutal, right? It's designed to wash people out because the cost of failure in a jet is measured in lives.
Absolutely.
McKenna noted that Hansen possessed jealousy-inducing natural flying talent. But what made him stand out was his complete lack of arrogance.
Because while 99% of young pilots were hitting the bar on a Friday night to blow off the immense stress of the week's evaluations, Hansen was doing something entirely different.
He was in the flight simulator classroom, and he wasn't alone polishing his own elite skills. He stayed late to patiently work with his struggling classmates, running them through simulations over and over, coaching them to ensure they wouldn't wash out.
He was using his elite talent to elevate the people around him.
Yes.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is a crucial insight into aerospace psychology.
Yep.
The pop culture maverick might be entertaining on screen, but modern space agencies view that archetype as a massive liability.
They don't want the lone wolf.
They do not want reckless daredevils. When you are locked in a metal tube hundreds of thousands of kilometers from Earth, surrounded by the vacuum of space, ego is deadly. They are looking for hyper-competent empaths.
Empaths in space. I love that.
People who can de-escalate tension and elevate the collective intelligence of the crew.
That reframes his character entirely.
Yeah.
His empathy wasn't just a nice personality trait. It was a hardcore survival skill.
Exactly.
And he even extended it to the local community, volunteering as a big brother and organizing an open base day so local kids could experience the fighter jets up close. He was actively trying to recreate that encyclopedia spark for the next generation. McKenna literally described him as saint-like.
But empathy and patience on the ground don't mean much if your brain shuts down the moment the environment actively tries to kill you.
Fair point.
The transition from saint-like instructor to lunar astronaut requires testing the absolute limits of human panic.
Which takes us to the 2008 Canadian Space Agency recruitment drive. The statistical improbability of this is wild. The CSA received over 5,000 applications from the best doctors, test pilots, engineers.
5,000.
And out of those 5,000, there were exactly 2 spots available. An acceptance rate of 0.04%.
You are competing against the most highly qualified people in the nation. And Hansen, at 33 years old, along with astrophysicist David Saint-Jacques, were the 2 victors.
But the process to get there was described in the sources as devilish. When I was reading the source documents about the water drop simulation, I fell down a massive rabbit hole regarding human physiology, because the test isn't just about swimming.
Oh, not at all.
Let's break down the helicopter water drop. Think about how your heart races when you get a stressful email at work. Now imagine trying to solve a puzzle upside down in freezing black water.
It's an exercise in sheer psychological terror.
So you are strapped tightly into a seat inside a simulated helicopter cockpit. They hoist you 6 meters, about 20 feet into the air, over a pool of water. But it's freezing cold, and it is pitch black.
And then they drop you.
They drop the rig, you free fall, smash into the water, and the moment the cockpit hits, it violently flips upside down and rapidly fills with freezing water.
The physiological reaction to that is involuntary and massive. The moment freezing water hits your face, the mammalian dive reflex kicks in.
What does that do to the body?
Your heart rate plummets, that's bradycardia. Your blood vessels constrict to force blood to your core. But simultaneously, the shock triggers an involuntary gasp reflex. Your brain is drowning in cortisol and adrenaline, screaming at you to thrash and panic.
And thrashing means you die.
Exactly.
You are inverted, strapped in, and your task is to methodically unbuckle yourself, find the exit, and escape before you drown. And they made Hansen do this 3 times in a row, with each round becoming more complex. Maybe a door is jammed or the harness is tangled.
Just brutal.
And they also put him through simulated worship fires with blinding smoke and extreme heat and toxic chemical leak scenarios where he had to don protective gear in seconds.
I have to ask, if his job is going to be in a high-tech spaceship, why on earth are they drowning him in a fake helicopter?
That's the core of astronaut selection psychology. The underlying mechanism they are testing here is cognitive load capacity under duress.
Okay, so it's a brain test, not a swimming test.
Precisely. When the environment spirals out of control, the amygdala, the fear center of the brain, attempts to hijack the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for logical thought. For most people, the prefrontal cortex just goes dark. They regress to pure, chaotic survival instinct.
So the astronaut selection board doesn't actually care about his helicopter escape technique. They are testing whether his brain freezes.
They're looking for the rare individual who can apply prefrontal cognitive overrides. Hansen passed because that saint-like patience extended to his own internal panic responses.
He could observe his own severe physiological fear, acknowledge it, and then patiently, methodically work through the complex mechanical problem of the tangled harness while his body was convinced it was dying.
He had absolute mastery over his internal environment, so he beats out 4,998 other brilliant people. He survives the freezing water, the fires, the toxic leaks. He's officially an astronaut.
You made it.
He moves his wife, Catherine, and their 3 young kids from Alberta all the way down to Houston, Texas, to NASA's Johnson Space Center. He is ready for space, and then he waits.
He waits for almost 2 decades, 17 years.
I think this is the most psychologically fascinating part of the story. The contrast is stark. The other guy from his 2008 class, David Saint-Jacques, gets assigned a mission. In 2018, Saint-Jacques flies to the ISS and spends a record-breaking 204 days in orbit.
And while his peer is floating above the Earth, Jeremy Hansen is still grounded.
Still on Earth. So what does this all mean? The Major League Baseball analogy works perfectly here. Imagine getting drafted first overall into the major leagues, but instead of letting you play, they ask you to be the coach for the rookie squad for 17 consecutive seasons.
The psychological toll of that waiting period cannot be overstated. Imagine passing the most rigorous selection process on the planet, relocating your entire family, maintaining peak physical and mental condition every single day, and watching your peers launch while you stay behind.
Most people would quit.
The natural human response is resentment, bitterness, or at least passivity.
But the sources highlight his complete lack of bitterness. He aggressively sought out the hardest challenges on Earth, like the 2014 NEMO 19 mission.
Right. NEMO, the NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operations, is as close to space as you can get on Earth. NASA uses underwater habitats off the coast of Florida as analogs for the isolation and danger of space exploration.
Hansen was sent 19 meters underwater to live in a confined habitat for 7 straight days. And I looked into the physics of this. It's not just a casual scuba trip. At 19 meters down, your body absorbs a massive amount of nitrogen into the bloodstream due to the ambient pressure. It's called saturation diving.
And the psychological weight of saturation diving is intense. Because if an emergency happens, a fire in the habitat, a medical issue, you cannot just swim to the surface.
Right, because of the nitrogen.
Exactly. If you ascend too quickly, the dissolved nitrogen forms bubbles in your blood and tissues, causing fatal decompression sickness. You are just as trapped down there as you would be in orbit.
So he was leading a team simulating a deep space mission to an asteroid, testing neutral buoyancy spacewalks, which perfectly mimics the zero-gravity tool manipulation required in space. And he thrived in that environment.
He really did.
And because of that extreme competence and his unshakable team-first attitude, NASA made a historic decision.
He became the first Canadian in history to be put in charge of training new classes of NASA astronaut candidates.
That detail completely blew me away. Let's really look at the ego management required for that. To transition from a hotshot fighter pilot to an earthbound instructor.
Yes, an elite cadre of American military pilots and engineers are being trained and evaluated by a Canadian who hasn't even been to space himself yet. NASA trusted him with their most valuable human assets.
It requires a monk-like humility. He wasn't waiting for an opportunity to be handed to him on a silver platter. He was actively, daily, building the ladder for the next generation of astronauts to climb, and he was cheering for them when they reached the top before he did.
And that 17-year demonstration of profound humility is exactly why he is going to the moon. When NASA and the Canadian Space Agency sat down to pick the Artemis II crew, they didn't want the lone wolf maverick,
No, they wanted the guy who spent 2 decades building the ladder.
which culminates in the April 2023 announcement. Hansen becomes the first non-American assigned to a lunar mission.
And his reaction at the press conference is so completely on brand. He doesn't pound his chest or say, "It's about time." He takes the microphone and credits the generations of Canadian space workers before him, the engineers who built the Canadarm, the diplomats who negotiated the treaties.
He literally said he was just in the right place at the right time.
Which is the understatement of the century.
It really reveals how he views his role, though. He genuinely sees himself as the tip of a spear forged by thousands of other people.
But the moment the press conference ends, the intense preparation begins. And we see this fascinating duality in his personality emerge during the Artemis II training. On one hand, he is a hyper-focused perfectionist. The sources detail his obsessive habit of cornering the NASA engineers who built the Orion spacecraft.
He would relentlessly grill them about every single subsystem.
And it makes perfect sense when you understand the engineering of the Orion capsule. It's not a commercial airplane. It relies on a hyper-complex life support system that scrubs carbon dioxide and manages thermal extremes ranging from the freezing vacuum of space to the 5,000-degree Fahrenheit plasma of atmospheric reentry.
Right.
He would pick a single system and ask questions until he understood every line of code and every mechanical redundancy. They joked that if there was a tiny, obscure flaw in Orion, Hansen had already found it.
But he wasn't doing it out of arrogance. He was doing it because the margin for error near the moon is zero. His crew's lives depend on his intimate understanding of that machine.
And speaking of the crew, the pressure of that perfectionism must be immense. But they developed an incredible familial bond to cope with it. There's a great anecdote about the mission commander, Reed Wiseman. NASA has these massive, heroic posters of the Artemis crew hanging in the long corridors at the Johnson Space Center.
And that's a highly formalized, serious environment.
Exactly. But whenever the training stress got too intense, Commander Wiseman would walk up to the giant poster of Jeremy Hansen's face, lean in incredibly close, and pretend to painstakingly count the individual pores on Hansen's face.
That's hilarious.
It's such an absurd, hilarious way to deflate the heroic tension and prove that they are brothers, not just colleagues.
This raises an important question, though. How does one endure the pressure of a lunar mission? That coping mechanism points to the broader ecosystem required to survive. The crew is a family, but the actual family ecosystem is the ultimate grounding force.
His wife, Catherine, is a highly successful doctor. The reality of their dynamic is fascinating because it's not a case of a spouse just sitting at home waiting. They are both operating at the absolute peak of demanding professions while raising 3 kids in Houston. It requires a profound partnership.
The psychological tether of family life is vital for an astronaut. You can spend 12 hours a day in a simulator analyzing orbital rendezvous vectors, but when you walk through your front door, you still have to deal with the immediate realities of math homework and taking out the recycling.
It keeps them tethered to humanity.
Precisely.
And his kids' perspectives completely validate everything we've discussed about his character. His eldest son, Devin, gave an interview where he said something really moving. He noted that people admire his dad for having this cool superhero job, but Devin said he admires his dad for his patience and calm demeanor.
For a teenage boy to identify emotional regulation and patience as his father's most admirable traits, while his father is literally training to fly to the moon, proves that the saint-like demeanor McKenna saw decades earlier is his genuine core identity.
And then his daughter Ashley absolutely roasts him on national television.
Well, on this part.
They ask her about his superpowers for surviving the grueling training, and she reveals that his ultimate superpower is the ability to nap absolutely anywhere at any time. He can just switch off and sleep on command.
The napping detail is brilliant because it's not just a funny dad quirk. It is a highly sought-after physiological trait in special operations and spaceflight.
I was hoping we could dive into that because the napping isn't just fatigue, is it? Looking at the physiological data and the sources, this is an elite form of downregulation.
You're hitting on the exact mechanism. It's about parasympathetic nervous system control, specifically vagal tone.
Okay, vagal tone.
Yeah. After spending 8 hours in a high-alert, adrenaline-soaked simulator where every alarm is screaming, an average person's cortisol levels remain elevated for hours. They carry that residual stress. Hansen's ability to instantly fall asleep means he can consciously activate his parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest function, metabolize the stress hormones, and reset his brain. It's an elite biological efficiency.
The duality of the man. He's an intense perfectionist, making sure millions of pounds of thrust won't kill his crew, but also a goofy dad who gets roasted by his kids for sleeping on the couch.
Oh, perfect balance.
It brings up a profound realization about the nature of exploration. We have this pervasive cultural myth of the solitary hero, the lone genius striking out into the unknown. Hansen's story proves that astronauts are the exact opposite.
They are the culmination of an intricate, massive web of human connection. The supportive parents and neighbors in Elsa Craig who built the greenhouse around his dream, the air cadet instructors, the flight school peers, the brilliant spouse, the grounding children, the crewmates. He is going to the moon, but he is being carried there by thousands of people.
And as he prepares to finally leave Earth, he is making a conscious, incredibly public effort to ensure that the community and history that supported him are coming with him. And he's doing it through the mission patch he will wear on his shoulder.
Every astronaut contributes to their mission patch, but Hansen commissioned a deeply personal design from an indigenous Canadian artist.
The geometry of the patch itself is unique. It's not a circle or a shield. It's a heptagon, a seven-sided polygon. It represents the indigenous 7 sacred teachings, which are foundational ethical principles in many First Nations cultures: truth, respect, love, courage, honesty, wisdom, and humility.
To carry an ethical framework like that into space is a profound philosophical statement.
The design is stunning. It features 7 animals representing those teachings: the moon, the outline of Turtle Island, which is the indigenous name for North America, and the bow of Artemis, connecting Greek mythology to the ancient history of the continent.
It's beautiful.
And his reasoning for this design fundamentally changed how I view the mission. He explicitly stated he wanted to honor indigenous peoples as the continent's earliest explorers and skywatchers, people who have been studying the cosmos and navigating by the stars for millennia before a telescope was ever invented.
It creates a powerful juxtaposition. You have the Orion spacecraft, arguably the most complex, cutting-edge technological marvel of modern engineering, representing the absolute pinnacle of human industrial capability. And attached to the shoulder of the person flying it is an anchor to thousands of years of ancient wisdom.
He stated clearly that he will carry this patch with immense humility. It proves that his philosophy of exploration isn't about planting a flag for his own ego or to conquer nature. It's about acting as a humble representative, carrying the collective curiosity and historical continuity of humanity forward into the dark.
It is the ultimate rejection of the arrogant conqueror trope, and it is exactly why he is the right person to return humanity to the lunar surface.
Which brings us back to where we started. I want you to put yourself back on that launch pad. April 1st, 2026. The engines are roaring, vibrating through your chest.
The 40-year wait from that freezing winter day on the farm in Ailsa Craig is over.
The little boy who built a spaceship in his wooden treehouse is now outdistancing the heroes he read about in that encyclopedia.
He is breaking the gravitational and historical bounds of Earth.
And right before launch, Hansen shared a perspective that perfectly encapsulates the mission of this deep dive. He said that the goal of breaking humanity's distance record, of going further than Apollo, isn't just to set a new high score.
What's the goal then?
The purpose is to salute the pioneers who paved the way, and then to turn to the next generation and say, hey, let's go further. Every destination is just a new starting point.
The moon is no longer the finish line. It is the gateway.
Which leaves us with one final, lingering thought for you to carry with you today. If an entire farming community simply refusing to laugh at a 7-year-old impossible dream eventually resulted in a human being leaving Earth's orbit, what impossible dreams are you currently nurturing or quietly, casually dismissing in the people around you? What fragile seed is waiting for a greenhouse? And where could those dreams lead? How far into the unknown could they reach if you simply nodded and said, let's make it happen?